Beneath the ashes, the twisted case of Gary Ferris's murder. The Georgia sun blazed mercilessly over the Ferris family's sprawling 10-acre farm, casting long shadows across the pastures and ponds that dotted the property. But no amount of sunlight could illuminate the darkness that had taken hold. On the morning of July 5, 2018, Scott Ferris awoke to an unsettling stillness. His father, Gary Ferris, had not been seen for 2 full days. This was unusual but not entirely alarming. Gary was known to be busy, often wrapped up in work or tending to the farm's upkeep. Yet, something about this absence felt different, an unshakable unease that gnawed at the edges of Scott's mind. Scott entered the farmhouse and immediately noticed his mother, Melody, pacing in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her hands clenched into tight fists. "Have you seen Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely concealed fear. In fact, no one had seen Gary since the evening of July 3rd. His Mercedes remained parked in the driveway, and his CPAP machine, a vital device he used nightly for sleep apnea, was still in its usual place in the basement bedroom. It was clear that Gary hadn't left the property voluntarily. The weight of concern settled heavily over them. Melody, Scott, and Amanda, the youngest of the Ferris siblings, decided to search the property. The farm was vast, a mix of open pastures and dense woodland. Gary, who had been experiencing ongoing health issues, could have collapsed somewhere on the grounds. The trio began their search, calling his name as they walked the familiar paths. Their steps eventually led them to the edge of the woods, where a burn pile smoldered faintly. This pile was a regular feature of Gary's maintenance routine, used to dispose of brush and debris from the farm. But today, something was different. As Scott approached the pile, the acrid smell of burning brush gave way to a more sinister scent, one he would later describe as unmistakably human. His heart raced as he peered closer. Amid the ash and charred remnants of what appeared to be tree limbs, Scott noticed fragments of bone. And then, with a jolt of horror, he saw the unmistakable curve of a human skull partially buried beneath the blackened debris. He froze, the reality of the discovery hitting him like a wave. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone and dialed 911. "My father is missing," he said, his voice shaking. "We've been searching the property, and I think I just found him in the burn pile." The dispatcher's questions blurred in Scott's ears as he struggled to process what he was seeing. Drawing on his military background, Scott described the scene with grim certainty. "This looks like a burned body. I'm almost sure it's him." Law enforcement arrived within hours, transforming the serene Ferris property into a crime scene. Forensic investigators combed through the smoldering remains, carefully extracting fragments of bone and ash. The remains were later confirmed to be human, and dental records would soon verify the family's worst fears. The charred remains belonged to Gary Ferris, the towering figure they had affectionately called Big Daddy. At first, investigators considered the possibility of a tragic accident. Gary was known to spend time at the burn pile, tending to fires as part of his routine farm work. Could he have suffered a medical emergency, such as a heart attack, and fallen into the flames? It seemed plausible, given his history of health problems. But that theory was swiftly discarded when a crucial piece of evidence emerged. Lodged in Gary's ribs was a single, burned bullet, a discovery that turned the case on its head. This was no accident. It was murder. Gary Ferris was a man of authority and presence, both in his family and his community. Standing at 6'3" and weighing over 300 pounds, he was a formidable figure, known for his booming voice and commanding demeanor. As a successful corporate attorney, he had built a life of privilege and comfort for his wife, Melody, and their 4 children. But beneath his professional success lay a personal life riddled with tension and dysfunction. Gary's marriage to Melody had long been strained. Though married for over 30 years, they lived largely separate lives within the same house. Gary resided in the basement, where he had his own living space and office, while Melody occupied the master bedroom upstairs. Their interactions were infrequent and often fraught with conflict. By 2018, Gary had grown deeply suspicious of Melody, not only for her well-documented infidelities but also for something far more sinister. He confided in his children that he believed Melody was trying to poison him, citing mysterious health episodes that left him weak and disoriented after eating meals she prepared. The Ferris children, Christopher, Scott, Emily, and Amanda, had complicated relationships with their parents. Christopher, the eldest, was estranged, accused of stealing money from family accounts. Scott, who lived in a loft above the barn, struggled to find stability and independence. Emily and Amanda, while closer to their father, were not immune to the emotional toll of the family's dysfunction. Despite their flaws and differences, they all shared a deep love for Gary. He was the glue that held the family together, even as cracks in their foundation grew wider. As news of Gary's death spread, so did the questions. Who could have done this? And why? To the outside world, the Ferris family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a picture-perfect Southern lifestyle. But as investigators began to dig deeper, it became clear that the truth was far more complex and far darker than anyone could have imagined. What had begun as a missing persons case was now a chilling murder investigation, one that would expose the secrets and betrayals lurking behind the Ferris family's polished facade. The family and their secrets. The Ferris family farm stood as a symbol of success, a sprawling 10-acre property tucked away in the serene countryside of Cherokee County, Georgia. To an outsider, it was the picture of Southern charm, a pastoral haven with white fenced pastures, a picturesque pond, and a farmhouse straight out of country living. Inside, however, the Ferris family lived a very different reality, one fraught with tension, betrayal, and secrets that would ultimately tear them apart. Gary Ferris, the patriarch, was the embodiment of power and authority. A corporate attorney with a booming voice and an imposing 6'3" frame, he commanded respect both in the courtroom and at home. His career had been nothing short of illustrious, earning him millions and the admiration of his peers. Yet, the same drive that made him a legal powerhouse also alienated him from those closest to him. He ran his household with the same no-nonsense demeanor he brought to his cases, a quality that earned him the nickname Big Daddy. But Gary's success came at a cost. His marriage to Melody, a petite and striking woman with a flair for organization, was unraveling. The couple had been married for over 3 decades, but the love they once shared had been replaced by a cold coexistence. Gary lived in the basement, a self-contained world where he slept, worked, and often ate alone. Melody, meanwhile, occupied the master's suite upstairs, running the household and maintaining the farm's polished image. Despite their estrangement, the Ferrises kept up appearances for the sake of their 4 children: Christopher, Scott, Emily, and Amanda. To the outside world, they were the epitome of Southern charm, hosting annual barbecues and holiday gatherings. But behind closed doors, arguments often erupted over money, betrayals, and unmet expectations, shattering the illusion of perfection. Arguments were frequent, and financial stress compounded the strain. Though Gary was a high earner, his family's spending habits often outpaced his income, leading to tensions that would later become pivotal in the investigation into his death. A marriage in crisis. By the late 2000s, Melody's dissatisfaction with her marriage was no longer a secret. She had begun seeking comfort outside the confines of her relationship with Gary. Her first known affair was with a man named Ted Wise, a relationship that lasted 2 years before ending in 2010. Gary was devastated by the betrayal and even filed for divorce. According to family members, the divorce proceedings were halted when Melody promised to change, but the damage to their marriage was irreparable. Not long after, Melody began another affair, this time with Rusty Barton, a man she met through her second cousin, Martha Jane Barton. Rusty, a Tennessee resident with a penchant for charm, quickly became a fixture in Melody's life. Under the pretense of caring for Martha Jane, Melody would make regular trips to Tennessee, where she and Rusty carried on their relationship. The affair was poorly hidden. Rusty even attended Emily's wedding as Melody's guest, dancing with her in plain view of family and friends while Gary stood by in silence. Despite these humiliations, Gary chose not to confront Melody publicly. Perhaps he was protecting his children or clinging to some hope of reconciliation. Whatever his reasons, his silence only deepened his resentment. In private, Gary began to voice suspicions that went beyond infidelity. By 2018, he was convinced Melody was actively trying to harm him. He confided in his children that he believed she was poisoning him, citing mysterious health episodes that left him weak and disoriented after eating meals she prepared. The symptoms: burning in his throat, extreme fatigue, and sudden weakness had plagued him for years, and he could no longer ignore the possibility that Melody was behind them. The children's struggles. While Gary and Melody's marriage was crumbling, their children were dealing with struggles of their own. Christopher, the eldest, had become estranged from the family after being accused of stealing money from family accounts. Bank records revealed unauthorized transactions, including checks forged in Gary's name. Despite repeated confrontations, Christopher denied the allegations, further fracturing his relationship with his father. Scott, the second eldest, had his own set of issues. After serving in the military and completing a tour in Iraq, he returned home to live in the loft above the family's barn. In his 30s, Scott had yet to find steady work or a sense of purpose. He contributed to the farm sporadically but was largely reliant on his parents for financial support. This dependency became a source of tension between him and Gary, who often expressed frustration at Scott's lack of direction. Emily, the third child, had managed to build a life outside the farm. Married and raising her own family, she maintained a relatively close relationship with Gary but kept a wary distance from the drama that consumed her siblings. Amanda, the youngest, was the most optimistic of the four, often acting as the family's peacemaker. She adored her father and desperately wanted to see her parents reconcile, but even her optimism couldn't shield her from the chaos around her. Financial strains and hidden resentments. The Ferris family's financial situation was another source of stress. Gary's earnings as a corporate attorney were substantial, but the family's spending habits created a constant strain. Melody, in particular, was known for her extravagant purchases, often borrowing credit cards from her children under the pretense of emergencies. Gary grew increasingly frustrated with her spending, once texting her, "Your profligate spending must stop. I work every day, and between you, Scott, and Chris, I cannot keep up." This financial pressure compounded the tension in the household. Gary's meticulous tracking of family expenses became a point of contention, with Melody accusing him of being controlling and overly critical. The children, too, felt the strain, each vying for financial support while grappling with their own issues of independence and responsibility. A family on the brink. By the summer of 2018, the Ferris family was teetering on the edge of collapse. Gary's health was deteriorating, his marriage was in shambles, and his relationships with his children were strained at best. Melody, for her part, seemed to be living in a parallel world, maintaining an air of normalcy while carrying on her affair with Rusty. The children were divided, some aligning with Gary, others with Melody, and none entirely free from the fallout of their parents' fractured relationship. Gary's death would bring these tensions to a boiling point, exposing the secrets and lies that had been festering for years. The Ferris family farm, once a symbol of prosperity, would become the backdrop for one of Georgia's most chilling murder cases. As investigators began to piece together the events leading up to Gary's death, it became clear that this was no ordinary crime. It was the result of years of dysfunction, betrayal, and unresolved grievances, a tragedy that had been brewing just beneath the surface. The question remained, who among the Ferris family could have committed such a heinous act? And what dark motives lay behind the murder of Big Daddy? The answers would prove as complex and twisted as the family itself. The evening of July 3, 2018, began like any other on the Ferris family farm. Melody Ferris claimed she spent much of it chasing after horses that had escaped their enclosure, a task she described as exhausting and frustrating. Scott Ferris, her son, had been out golfing earlier that day and returned to the property late at night. Somewhere on the sprawling 10-acre farm, Gary Ferris, the family patriarch, went about his evening routines. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. As dawn broke on July 4th, the Ferris household noticed Gary's absence. His CPAP machine, essential for managing his sleep apnea, was untouched in the basement where he slept. His Mercedes remained in the driveway, and his belongings were undisturbed. Melody, her tone unusually casual, suggested that Gary might have gone to visit a friend or taken a walk, dismissing concerns with a wave of her hand. But as the hours dragged on, her evasive demeanor only heightened the sense of unease that had taken hold of the household. Together, Melody, Scott, and Amanda, the youngest of Gary's 4 children, began searching the property, calling out for him as they checked every familiar corner of the farm. It was Scott who made the grim discovery. Near the edge of the woods, in a burn pile Gary often used for farm debris, he noticed a smoldering fire. At first, it looked like any other pile of ash and charred wood. But as he got closer, the smell changed acrid and unmistakably human. Scott's heart raced as he scanned the pile more carefully. Amid the ashes, he saw something that made his stomach churn: bone fragments and the unmistakable curve of a human skull. Shaking, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "My father is missing," Scott told the dispatcher, his voice trembling. "We've been searching the property, and I think I just found him in the burn pile." Within hours, the serene Ferris farm was overrun with law enforcement and forensic investigators. The smoldering remains in the burn pile were quickly confirmed as human. Dental records would later verify the family's worst fears: the charred fragments belonged to Gary Ferris. What appeared at first to be a tragic accident, a man succumbing to a medical emergency and falling into the flames, was soon ruled out. A single burned bullet, lodged in Gary's ribs, shattered any illusion of an accident. Gary Ferris had been murdered. Investigators turned their attention to the Ferris home, and what they found raised even more questions. A faint trail of blood droplets led from the kitchen to the basement stairs, continuing down into Gary's living quarters. The droplets stopped near his recliner, where investigators found more blood. Although the area had been cleaned, luminol revealed traces of what had been scrubbed away. On the floor between the recliner and an ottoman, they discovered a single spent bullet. The evidence suggested Gary had been shot in the basement and his body moved to the burn pile. Yet, the scene lacked signs of a struggle: no overturned furniture, no blood spatter. It was as though the area had been meticulously sanitized, save for the missed bullet. Melody's behavior immediately drew suspicion. When informed that the remains were human, she responded with a calmness that investigators found unsettling. Her alibi for the evening of July 3 raised even more doubts. She claimed to have spent the night chasing loose horses on the property, but Scott, who returned home late that night, saw no signs of such an event. The stables were secure, and there were no horses wandering the grounds. Adding to the intrigue was surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart. On the morning of July 4, Melody had been caught on camera purchasing cleaning supplies, including bleach. When asked about the purchases, she explained that she had been cleaning the house in preparation for a holiday gathering, a claim investigators found suspicious given the timing. Further complicating the timeline was Gary's CPAP machine. Data from the device showed it had not been used on the night of July 3, indicating that Gary had not gone to bed as usual. GPS data from Gary's phone revealed even more unsettling details. On the morning of July 4, the phone moved around the property, including a stop at the burn pile, before coming to rest in the house around 9:05 a.m. Investigators concluded that these movements were likely orchestrated by the killer in an attempt to create a false narrative of Gary's activities. The bullet found in Gary's ribs became a crucial piece of evidence. Forensic analysis revealed it had been fired from a .38 caliber firearm. This detail raised immediate questions about the availability of such a weapon within the Ferris household. When asked about firearms, Melody told investigators that Scott had taken most of the family's guns years earlier, many of which were stolen during a break-in. Scott, however, offered a different story. He claimed to have recently seen a snub-nosed .38 revolver in the basement, in a drawer near Gary's recliner, a chilling coincidence given the location of the bullet and the crime scene. As investigators dug deeper, a potential motive began to emerge. Financial records showed that Gary had life insurance policies totaling over $2 million, with additional payouts for accidental death. Melody, as the beneficiary, stood to gain a significant sum if Gary were no longer in the picture. Text messages recovered from Gary's phone revealed the extent of the couple's financial tensions. In one message, Gary wrote, "Your spending is out of control. I work every day, and it's never enough." These messages painted a picture of a marriage strained by money, resentment, and betrayal. The dysfunction within the Ferris family set the stage for a tragedy waiting to unfold. As investigators began piecing together the events surrounding Gary's death, the cracks in the family's foundation became impossible to ignore, leading them to examine each member's role more closely, including allegations of theft. Scott, a former soldier who lived in the barn's loft, had both the physical strength and opportunity to move Gary's body to the burn pile. Emily, the third child, was more removed from the family drama, while Amanda, the youngest, remained loyal to Melody, defending her mother against mounting accusations. With multiple potential suspects and a tangled web of family dynamics, the investigation was anything but straightforward. Melody's calm demeanor, combined with her purchases and the suspicious timeline, made her a prime suspect. But Scott's statements about the .38 revolver and his proximity to the burn pile on the morning of July 4 also raised eyebrows. And then there was Rusty Barton, Melody's lover, who had been in contact with her on the night of July 3. Although Rusty's alibi placed him in Tennessee, his internet searches, including inquiries about how police traced deleted texts, added an element of suspicion. As the investigation progressed, one thing became clear: the Ferris family was harboring secrets. The question was no longer whether Gary had been murdered, it was who among his family had betrayed him. The answers, investigators suspected, lay hidden within the fractured relationships and festering resentments that had plagued the Ferris household for years. The case, already shrouded in tragedy, was about to reveal the darkest depths of a family torn apart from within. The trial that followed revealed the extent of these fractures. Prosecutors painted Melody as the mastermind, emphasizing her financial troubles, her ongoing affair with Rusty Barton, and her suspicious purchases of cleaning supplies on July 4. They methodically connected the dots, arguing that her actions demonstrated premeditation and a clear desire to eliminate her husband. Her financial troubles, extramarital affair, and purchases of cleaning supplies were central to the prosecution's narrative. They theorized that Melody had shot Gary in the basement, attempted to clean the scene, and transported his body to the burn pile using either the family's tractor or an RTV. Once there, they argued, she stoked the fire to ensure the body was almost entirely incinerated. Melody's defense team pushed back, highlighting the lack of direct physical evidence linking her to the crime. They argued that no one had witnessed Melody commit the murder, and the gun used to kill Gary had never been found. The defense also pointed out the physical challenge Melody, a petite woman, would have faced in moving Gary's 300-pound body alone. They suggested that Scott, as a former soldier with the necessary strength and training, was a more plausible suspect. They also highlighted Scott's discovery of the body and his deletion of images from a trail camera on the property as potentially incriminating. The trial saw all 4 Ferris children take the stand, presenting conflicting narratives about their family dynamics and the events leading up to Gary's death. Christopher, Scott, and Emily testified against Melody, describing her as manipulative and emotionally detached. They detailed years of financial disputes, infidelity, and family dysfunction, painting a picture of a woman capable of orchestrating such a crime. Amanda, however, remained steadfast in her support for her mother, accusing her siblings of trying to shift blame to protect themselves. The trial also brought Rusty Barton, Melody's lover, into the spotlight. Initially cooperative with investigators, Rusty admitted to his relationship with Melody but denied any involvement in Gary's death. However, during the trial, he recanted parts of his earlier statements, claiming he had been pressured by law enforcement. This reversal cast doubt on his credibility and further complicated the case. Rusty's internet searches in the days following Gary's death, including queries about how police traced deleted texts, added another layer of suspicion, though his alibi placed him out of state at the time of the murder. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for 4 days before delivering their verdict. Melody Ferris was found guilty on all counts, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and concealing a death. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. During her sentencing hearing, Melody made a shocking statement, accusing Scott of being the true killer. "I have waited years to say this," she declared. "Scott killed his father. He took Big Daddy from us. This is unforgivable." The courtroom erupted in chaos as her accusations added another twist to an already convoluted case. Despite the verdict, many questions remained unanswered. The murder weapon was never recovered, and the exact sequence of events on the night of July 3 remained unclear. While some believed Melody's claims that Scott had played a role, others pointed to the overwhelming circumstantial evidence against her. The case, which began as a search for Gary Ferris, ended as a devastating portrait of a family consumed by secrets and betrayal. For those left behind, the scars of Gary's death and the trial that followed would never fully heal, leaving a legacy of tragedy that overshadowed the once idyllic Ferris farm. The verdict in Melody Ferris's trial marked the end of a harrowing legal battle but left behind a cloud of unanswered questions and unresolved emotions. Found guilty on all charges, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and concealing a death, Melody was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. For many, the conviction brought a semblance of justice, but Melody's final statement in court added a shocking twist to the case. In a steady yet bitter voice, she accused her son Scott of being the true killer. "Scott killed his father. He took Big Daddy from us. This is unforgivable," she declared, her words reverberating through the courtroom. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Prosecutors objected vehemently to her claims, calling them an unsubstantiated attempt to deflect blame. Scott, sitting stoically at the defense table, showed no outward reaction. For those who had followed the case closely, Melody's accusation underscored the deep fractures within the Ferris family, a family that appeared united in success but was, in truth, torn apart by suspicion and betrayal. In the aftermath of the trial, the Ferris family's relationships were left in tatters. Christopher, Scott, and Emily, who had all testified against their mother, maintained that Melody was guilty of their father's murder. They cited her extramarital affairs, financial motives, and a series of suspicious actions that aligned too closely with the prosecution's timeline. Amanda, the youngest sibling, stood by her mother, arguing that her siblings had their own reasons for shifting suspicion away from themselves. This division within the family turned a tragedy into a permanent rift, one unlikely to heal. The once proud Ferris farm, a sprawling 10-acre property that had been the family's home and a symbol of their success, stood empty for months after Gary's death. With no income to sustain it and the weight of the tragedy looming over it, the property eventually fell into foreclosure and was sold. What had once been a pastoral haven became a grim reminder of the darkness that had consumed the Ferris family. For Melody, life in prison became her new reality. Gone were the comforts of her well-kept home, her carefully curated lifestyle, and the facade of control she had worked so hard to maintain. Yet, even behind bars, she remained defiant, continuing to assert her innocence and placing blame on Scott for the crime. Melody appealed her conviction multiple times, but each appeal was denied, as courts consistently upheld the original verdict based on the weight of circumstantial evidence against her. Despite the conviction, many aspects of the case remained shrouded in mystery. The murder weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, was never recovered, leaving a significant piece of evidence missing. The precise sequence of events on the night of July 3, 2018, was never fully clarified. The cell phone data, GPS records, and blood trail provided a framework, but gaps in the timeline left room for speculation. Scott, though cleared of any formal accusations, continued to face scrutiny. His discovery of the body, his statements about the missing gun, and his deletion of trail camera footage raised questions about his involvement. While the jury found no evidence to implicate him directly, Melody's final accusations and the circumstantial oddities around his actions kept public curiosity alive. Rusty Barton, Melody's lover, also remained a figure of suspicion. His inconsistent testimony and suspicious internet searches suggested he may have known more than he admitted, though his alibi placed him out of state during the time of the murder. The Ferris case serves as a chilling reminder of the destructive power of secrets and unresolved conflicts within a family. It forces us to confront a harsh truth: no amount of wealth or status can shield us from the consequences of betrayal and dysfunction. In the end, it wasn't an outsider who tore the Ferris family apart, it was their own inability to face their demons before it was too late. On the surface, the Ferris family seemed to have it all: wealth, status, and an idyllic lifestyle in the Georgia countryside. Beneath that polished exterior, however, lay years of resentment, betrayal, and dysfunction. Gary Ferris's murder was not just a random act of violence but the culmination of a deeply fractured family dynamic. His death became a tragic symbol of how unresolved tensions can spiral into devastating consequences. For those closest to the case, the scars ran deep. Christopher, Scott, Emily, and Amanda carried the weight of their family's tragedy in different ways, their relationships with one another irreparably broken. The Ferris name, once synonymous with success and respectability, became forever associated with scandal and loss. The public, drawn to the case for its mix of mystery, drama, and courtroom intrigue, would remember it as a cautionary tale about the fragility of family bonds. In the end, the Ferris story leaves us with a haunting question: could this tragedy have been avoided if the family had confronted their issues before they reached a breaking point? The answer may never be known, but the lessons are clear. The Ferris case is a stark reminder that wealth, status, and appearances cannot protect a family from the consequences of unchecked greed, betrayal, and dysfunction. Gary Ferris's death left behind not only a family torn apart but also a legacy of unanswered questions. The tragedy that unfolded on that quiet Georgia farm serves as a sobering example of how the shadows of secrets can destroy even the strongest of families, leaving behind a legacy of pain and a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic lives. The story of Gary Ferris's murder is a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving. What seemed to be the idyllic life of a Southern family, built on wealth and tradition, masked a cauldron of secrets, betrayals, and unresolved conflicts. As investigators peeled back the layers, they uncovered a family fractured by greed, resentment, and mistrust, forces powerful enough to culminate in tragedy. The Ferris family's downfall was not the result of a single act but the culmination of years of dysfunction and denial. Gary Ferris, a towering figure in stature and presence, was both the glue that held the family together and a source of its tensions. His death exposed the fragility of the bonds that tied the Ferrises to one another, revealing a family unable to reconcile its past grievances. Melody's conviction brought some closure, but it also left lingering doubts. Was she the sole architect of Gary's demise, or was she a scapegoat in a crime shaped by collective culpability? Her final accusation of her son Scott cast a long shadow over the trial's resolution, ensuring that questions about the truth would persist. The missing murder weapon, the gaps in the timeline, and the web of motives left behind a sense of incompleteness, a feeling that justice, while served, was not absolute. This case offers a sobering lesson: the dangers of unresolved conflict and the weight of secrets. Beneath the surface of every family lies a tapestry of relationships, some strong, others frayed. Left unchecked, the fractures in these bonds can grow, creating cracks wide enough for tragedy to slip through. Gary Ferris's death was not just a murder, it was the tragic unraveling of a family that once seemed unbreakable. As we reflect on the Ferris case, we are reminded of the importance of confronting the truths that lie within our closest relationships. Transparency, accountability, and understanding are not just virtues, they are safeguards against the kind of destruction that claimed the Ferris family. The Georgia farm, once a symbol of prosperity, now stands as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what can happen when shadows are allowed to grow unchecked. In the end, the Ferris family's story serves as both a tragedy and a warning. It urges us to ask, what secrets do we keep? And at what cost? If you're captivated by stories like the tragic case of Gary Ferris, stories that peel back the layers of mystery and reveal the dark truths lurking beneath, then you're in the right place. At Truth, One and Shadows, we are committed to uncovering the untold stories that linger in the shadows, blending meticulous research with powerful storytelling to bring you the most compelling true crime content.